Hello, this is the Lord's Legion and welcome to a brand new movie review, and as you can see this is quite possibly the very first MCU review that I've done that isn't going to be a part of the path to Infinity War or Endgame. But nevertheless I'm still including this in the playlist purely because it is an MCU movie regardless. That being said, we have finally reached to the epilogue of Phase 3, in which will give us our first glimpse of the MCU post-Endgame. And the movie that is somewhat the gateway from Phase 4 is in fact Spider-Man Far From Home. A movie that has a lot to live up to, given that it is both a sequel to Homecoming as well as being the first film post-Endgame. But without further ado, let's begin with this review. Now I'm just going to say this outright in saying that depending on your preference of which version of Spider-Man you enjoyed the most, this might be somewhat of a divisive movie. Or rather, your enjoyment of this movie will depend on whether or not you enjoy the MCU Spider-Man. If you are one of those Spider-Man fans who aren't really so big on the changes, or you're not a fan of the MCU Spider-Man as a whole, then chances are you are not going to enjoy this one very much. And as someone who does fairly enjoy the MCU Spider-Man, as well as really digging Spider-Man Homecoming, I honestly thought that Spider-Man Far From Home mostly delivered on all of its promises. And it's a very solid movie post-Endgame. Now like I said, Spider-Man Far From Home picks up right where Avengers Endgame left off, in which we do see how Peter Parker does cope with the loss of Tony Stark. And it does take a huge toll on him to the point where he kind of wants to let loose and just make the most of his trip in Europe and try and get with MJ. However, we do see new threats emerge, known as the Eternals, in which sets Peter back in action as Spider-Man once more, and with the help of Nick Fury as well as Mysterio, it is up to Spider-Man to take down the Eternals once and for all. Now what I do enjoy about the movie's plot is that we do step into the world of the MCU post the snap, as well as how Peter does cope with the loss of Tony Stark and how he has to step up into filling his shoes. Although I do wish that we did get to explore from the former a little more, because I do feel like it did seem like a bit of an afterthought. Granted, I understand that the whole story is based on Peter post Endgame and how he is coping with everything surrounding him, but even still I feel like they could have balanced it out a little better. Speaking of Peter, I do think that Tom Holland is just as great as Spider-Man as always, and I really do enjoy his development in this film, in that he does have to cope with Tony Stark's passing while also having to fill that new void in becoming a hero in a similar vein to Iron Man, while not exactly in a literal sense. And like I said, I don't think this is going to be a change that everyone is going to enjoy, but in my eyes I do think that it does work for this version of Spider-Man specifically. Then we also have Zendaya as Michelle Jones, or MJ, and I honestly think that she does have a lot of chemistry with Peter, and I do buy into the relationship the more it develops. And granted, the romance might turn some people off because it is one of the main crucial elements within this movie, but me personally, I do think that it does work and that it's a good job that they do have a lot of chemistry together. We also have the return of Nick Fury and Maria Hill, and I do think that both Samuel L. Jackson as well as Kirby Smulders do really good jobs as those characters, given that they've been playing them for God knows how long at this point. And it is cool to see both of them back in action together once more. A real standout to me is of course Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio, who I do think is a really enjoyable villain. I'm not sure if I'd put him within the same league as the likes of Thanos or Killmonger per se, but he is still very enjoyable, unpredictable, and above all else a fun foil for Spider-Man. Though like with pretty much every single MCU villain, they did take some liberties with the character, but they still captured the core essence of Mysterio, and that is something that I can very much appreciate. And lastly, we do have the Elementals, in which I wasn't expecting anything groundbreaking out of those villains, but even still I do think they are a ton of fun, and I do especially enjoy their connections with Mysterio. And speaking of the Elementals, the action scenes in this movie are a huge step up from Homecoming, as they do implement people's powers and abilities even further, whether it be Spider-Man using his gadgets, or even the Elementals doing some chaos with their natural elements. And I especially really enjoy how they implement Mysterio's powers and how true they are to the comics, even if they did do a few tweaks here and there. As for the effects in this movie, they are once again a huge hit and miss, mainly because while the elementals themselves as well as some of Mysterio's powers look absolutely incredible, but much like with Spider-Man Homecoming, they once again overused the CG with Spider-Man's costume, even in scenes where it's not really needed, and it's unfortunate because all of his costumes look amazing. And in several areas he does look quite rubbery. But with all that being said, with so much obstacles this movie had to go through, I do feel like Spider-Man Far From Home does mostly succeed in all of the important elements. And while it will seem somewhat jarring to look back on Spider-Man Homecoming and this movie back to back while skipping the other MCU movies, given that this movie does rely heavily on Endgame's events, I still think Spider-Man Far From Home is a very solid sequel for Homecoming. I thought this was a really interesting take on Peter Parker's development post-Endgame. I also appreciated the change of scenery where Spider-Man goes through Europe. I thought that Mysterio was a really solid villain, and even though I do wish that they could have explored the MCU post-Endgame a little more, I still think they did do a relatively good job with what they had to do. And so for the final verdict for Spider-Man Far From Home, I'm going to go ahead and give it a much deserved 9 out of 10. As I believe this movie is a pretty solid epilogue for the MCU post-Endgame, and even the post-credit scenes in which they allude to for the future of Spider-Man is very exciting in my eyes. So what do you think of Spider-Man Far From Home if you've already seen it yet? Do you think that this is an excellent follow-up from Endgame, or do you think that this pales in comparison to the likes of the Raimi trilogy as well as Spider-Verse? Comment below and share some thoughts. And as always, thank you guys for watching this video. Please like and subscribe. Take care and have a good one.